In this video, we're going to talk a lot more about constructivism and a lot of things that constructivists believe in. Constructivists believe that your social environment affects the way you behave. Now, what does it mean to be socialized into your environment? It basically means that all of the groups around you offer you information, and this information makes you who you are. Same is not true of individuals. It is also true of larger organizations, and certainly true of businesses and nation states as well. They all have a social culture based upon the way in which they are socialized. Now, who are you socialized by? By your surrounding social groups. Let's name a few of them. Your family, your friends, and associated peer groups, of course. Your church, your school. Maybe you should question or think twice about some of the information that I'm giving you. I'm a teacher. I am socializing you. Your work, either now or certainly your career in the future, will be an important socializing influence on you. The media is an amazing socializing tool. And of course, the nation state and its ability to control information and affect what you know. The reason that this information is so easily socialized to us is that each of these sources represent important groups to us, and because we have affiliation with a group and we believe in the group, we are very likely to believe in the information that's being delivered to us, even if it's not true. There could be other groups, other religions, other countries, anything that is not considered to be part of your group, who also delivers you information, because psychologically speaking, people tend to be slightly closed-minded. You're not going to be willing to listen to that or believe that information as opposed to the information that comes to you from the groups that you like. Your social groups don't just control your information, they also set norms of proper behavior. Now, the word norm, it's a bit like the word normal. It essentially means just that, sort of what is considered to be appropriate behavior. Patricia Andrews defines norms as sets of expectations held by group members concerning what kinds of behavior or opinion are acceptable or unacceptable, good or bad, right or wrong, appropriate or inappropriate. Norms are often so understood people don't even think about them. Now, you can't think of norms necessarily as formal rules in which you must do this or you must not do this, or else there are certain consequences or punishments or rewards. Think about these, for example, as common social norms. Would you run around naked in public? That's a pretty strong social norm. Nobody has to punish you or reward you. It's just something that most people are unlikely to do, except in extremely crazy situations. When men dress up in women's clothing, saying things that are perceived to be against your group is generally considered to be against the social norm. If I were to go into a small town in Arkansas and stand up on a table in the middle of a town square and start talking about how Osama bin Laden was absolutely justified in commanding that a couple of planes fly into the World Trade Center, what do you think is likely going to happen to me? Well, let's start with social ostracization. Let's end with the possibility that there's going to be some crazy loon guy who's going to shoot me. Now, we like to believe that free speech is something that we value. We like to believe in the First Amendment. However, people in this country or in any place in the world aren't really free to say whatever they want to in any circumstance they want to. They are highly constrained by the norms that are around them. People like to be part of a cohesive group, and the pressure to do this is called conformity. Conformity happens when we behave according to what the majority wants, or according to what our groups find to be socially acceptable or within the norms. We conform. We act like other people. Now, here's a tough question. Who's a nonconformist? Is the person with the nose ring and the Mohawk wearing the crazy clothes, or the Mark wearing the crazy political shirts or whatever that you see from one video to the next and doing silly things? Well, that just depends, doesn't it? The guy with the Mohawk would genuinely be a nonconformist if he was a sprint worker. And the standard of dress in that situation would be that nobody shows up in a Mohawk. If he's hanging out with all his other friends who think that his Mohawk's cool and probably have their own crazy weird hairstyles and their own piercings and their own unusual clothes, that is not non-conforming behavior at all. Something that's considered to be sort of against the general social norm is use of illegal drugs. If you're in a group of people and somebody is passing around a marijuana cigarette and they pass it on to you, are you conforming to the norm, or are you breaking society's social structures? Well, in actuality, you're conforming to the norm, because if all your friends are doing it and you're doing it too, you're conforming to a form of peer pressure. Decision makers are feel just as much peer pressure as you do as far as conforming to norms. But the question is, what are their norms? What surrounds them? To a large extent, they are victims of the people who surround them. You can read about groupthink and learn about how people can be limited by the crazy things that their groups believe and sometimes lead to bad foreign policy outcomes. You can also consider a number of international norms, things that are considered to be acceptable in the international system that people just generally tend to follow. Things like sovereignty, balance of power, the international monetary system, maybe the security dilemma. Maybe they are so ingrained in the system that people don't necessarily think that much about them, but they become acceptable forms of behavior or predictable forms of behavior simply because actors are following social norms, that it doesn't really have to do with who has the most guns and bombs and bullets. It just seems to be a logical way for people to act based on the tradition or the norm that's accepted in the international system. There are domestic norms too, like the idea that when George W. Bush won the electoral vote, that Al Gore wouldn't lead a military coup against him. Right? There is a norm that we will have peaceful democratic transitions. Domestic control over the death penalty and over the military are really strong domestic norms here as well. These are somewhat eliminated in a lot of other places in the world, where sovereignty in military affairs, at least in Europe anyway, has been somewhat ceded to NATO and the European Union in some situations, and the death penalty has been largely abolished through most places in the world, except for the United States and a lot of totalitarian countries that also justify torture and a lot of other bad things. There are other norms that are emergent as the system has changed, and a lot of people believe that they're beginning to become restraining on the behavior of actors and individuals in the international system. Things like human rights, integration, free trade, enduring security communities may all sort of have a normative life of their own as well. So keep in mind that norms are not things that are formal. They're not things that we can see or feel or touch or and so on, but they essentially create a standard for a state feeling like they can be part of the international system or rejected by certain key allies and friends, and that kind of international peer pressure can sometimes be a very powerful motivator in the international system.